I wanted to follow up on what the latest with China is. Has the president made an offer for a Mar-a-Lago date? And there's also some reports that the Chinese feel the president's an unreliable negotiating partner after walking out on the North Korea talks.
Let me start with the first one. In terms of whether or not we have a date set, not yet. We're continuing in negotiations with China. When we have an announcement for the two leaders to sit down, we'll certainly let you know.
And what would you say to the concerns by the Chinese that the president's an unreliable negotiating partner after the talks with North Korea broke down and he walked away?
I would say that it's absurd. The president's going to make a deal if it's a good deal. He's going to make a deal if it's in the best interest of America. And if he doesn't feel like it's a good deal, it's not worth just signing a piece of paper. And the president didn't feel like what was on the table was enough. The president's 100% committed to denuclearization of the peninsula, and he's going to make sure that whatever we do furthers that process. We'll see what happens with North Korea the same way we're going to see what happens in the negotiations with China. They're ongoing, and the president's going to make sure whatever deal we get is in our best interest, that it's fair and reciprocal trade, that it protects our intellectual property, and that it actually has safeguards to make sure that the Chinese follow through with whatever commitments that they make.
Like, Sarah, picking up on that, does the president have any plans to speak with President Xi over the phone?
I'm not aware of any scheduled calls, but if we have any, we'll certainly keep you posted.
Is that the most likely step here, that they speak on the phone beforehand, or is it possible that these two still meet at the end of the month or the beginning?
We're going to keep everything on the table. Again, negotiations are ongoing. The president's team, as well as the Chinese delegation, continue conversations, and when they feel like it's time for the two leaders to sit down, we'll make that happen.
Hey, Mr. Lighthizer, you have always been so responsive, and you mentioned to Portman you speak to senators on a regular basis. I am one of those. Thank you very much. One thing that is important to my state, which has not yet been discussed, is India importing shrimp. And since the EU has put phytosanitary restrictions upon Indian shrimp, they are flooding the U.S. market, which is negatively impacting domestic producers. Now, if it was fair trade, that would be fine, but they subsidize, as you know, they subsidize their aquaculture. And so that subsidy, with the restrictions, ends up disadvantaging our folks disproportionately. I will note, if EU finds their shrimp unsanitary, I'm a little reluctant to have that shrimp in our state for health reasons, but that is almost a side issue. So with that kind of preamble, and knowing that USTR just announced the termination of India's GSP status last week, what additional authorities would the administration consider or feel as if it needs to address this shrimp dumping issue?
Well, I mean, I'm generally aware of the problem with shrimp. We have laws in place, as the senator knows, that you can bring cases and this industry has availed themselves of them at the Department of Commerce on anti-dumping, but also more importantly in the case of India, countervailing duty cases, in the event that you can show injury. And in this case, at least there's a history where the shrimp industry has been able to show industry, our injury. If the senator has specific ideas, I'm happy to go forward. Generally, in a situation like this, you're better off bringing litigation. As you know well, I've brought a lot of this litigation over the years, and it's a very effective remedy to actual subsidies. In this case, I don't know anything about the sanitary issue. I'm happy to raise that with the Department of Agriculture, which is, which I think has jurisdiction over that, and I'm happy to do that, and I will do it to see whether there is some avenue that's being overlooked.
Now, it seems as if going to that point, this seems like knowing that it's difficult to do this, but it does seem a scenario in which a kind of all-of-government response would be nice to have. FDA, for example, looking at the phytosanitary aspect of it, I don't know if a 301 tariff would be adequate to get India's attention, but India so far has not paid attention to this. There's antibiotics and allegedly fecal material being found in the farms where these shrimp are being grown. and which the EU finds objectionable. But to what degree could we hope for a coordinated response where, for example, I understand right now if there's a sanction, if shrimp is found to be contaminated, it's a business-to-business transaction. This shipping business is then sanctioned. On the other hand, it really should go back to the farmer, because a farmer might be supplying several export businesses, and if you just sample and find this one is bad, but you don't sample this, it is actually the originating farm, which is the issue. Again, it's phytosanitary, not trade, but on the other hand, it ultimately involves trade, if you follow what I'm saying.
No, I do, Senator, and we are concerned with phytosanitary standards. Usually we're on the other side of it. We're objecting to other countries that are using them artificially as a form of protectionism. But in this case, I'm happy to look into this. I don't know, what the Department of Agriculture does in this situation. I'm happy to look at it. And to the extent there are countervailing duty cases, I'm sure that the industry is looking at them. We have had trouble. As you know, we have given notice that we're going to stop the GSP program for India, and it's because largely there's been a very large number of trade access problems that we've had on which they have shown really no interest in making improvement. So the president has given them notice, and that's going to go forward unless there's some change in the situation. This is an issue, that I'm happy to raise in that context.
Sounds great. One more thing, I have 30 seconds left. I'll point out, I understand the USMCA does have something I've been interested in is trade-based money laundering. My understanding, the USMCA does have new provisions allowing for the two governments, Mexico and the United States, to collaborate more effectively in terms of looking at the financial aspects of it, if you will, correlating invoice with manifest. We'd love to work with you on that because I think that is a way cartels move billions out of our country, and it's something that, again, speaking of all of government, it seems like it will take an all of a government to address.
Senator Thune.
Thank you.
Bob, it's good to have you back. Senator Grassley, when you were on this committee and were the only member of this committee that at that time that when Bob was the top gun for President Dole, or pardon me, Senator Dole, and during those days, I was in the House, and whenever I would have a question that really pertained that I thought I could take the time of Senator Dole, he would always say, "See Bob." So it's good to see you back, sir. I think that I had a sanitary and phytosanitary question and a WTO question, and I think Senator Wyden put it very well. Senator Wyden gets a little wound up, but he was born in Wichita. He's a good guy. But he said real progress on the ground and was talking about jobs and to continue these tariffs. But there's tariff retaliation. There's also price recovery with regards to farm country. We're still 50% off from last year, for goodness sakes, in terms of farm income, farm revenue. We're still in a very bad way. And so there's a lot of feeling out in farm country, more especially, and you know this, forwards and backwards. But what I want to ask is, over the last 2 years, the administration has focused on bilateral trade agreements. The United States has stepped away from major multilateral agreements, including the Trans-Pacific Partnership. That's still very popular out in farm country. If we would, hitch our wagon there, especially as it relates to the WTO agreement on SPS measures, do you see room for multilateral agreements to advance the U.S. trade agenda and improve market access? And I think you and I just visited about a particular country that we think we ought to really focus on as opposed to the TPP, which might be a little bit big to swallow right now.
Oh, yeah.
Well, yeah, thank you, Senator. So I would say, first of all, the President is very focused on what's happening in farm country, as you know well, and we've seen an unfortunate decline in farm income with some bumps of basic decline for a long period of time, and it's something that has to be reversed. And you're right, there has been retaliation that has had a negative effect in farm country. But I always point out that, particularly with respect to China, no one has a bigger upside than opening up China than agriculture. We sell them in a normal year $18 or $19 billion worth of product, less last year for a variety of reasons. But they import a lot of goods from a lot of other places that they ought to be importing from the United States. So it's a big, big upside for agriculture generally, and it's something we're focused on. On the question of TPP, as you know, we are in the process of negotiating with Japan. I always tell people that there are 11 countries in TPP. We have FTAs with 6 of them. With respect to the other 5, 90%, 95% of the GDP is Japan. So if we can get an agreement with Japan that's a good agreement, that will go a long way towards having essentially the same effect as being in TPP. Personally, I didn't like TPP for a lot of the same reasons the President didn't, but I won't go into those now unless another member asks us to do it. We are still, so I want to move forward on Japan. I think that's really important for farmers. It's also important that we have a deal, if we can get a good deal with China, because that will open up a lot of agriculture sales, but also we're focusing, as you know well, very much on SPS issues and impediments to trade, across the board impediments to trade, of which there are a lot, but particularly in China. We're also spending a lot of time at the WTO working on these issues. This is one of those areas where you're in a committee and you're doing the actual day-to-day work. So it is a major focus of our activity. If we end up with a deal on China, and if we end up with a deal, at least an agricultural deal at an early time with Japan, I think there's a bright light on the horizon for agriculture, and that certainly is our objective, all while we're trying to take care of these SPS issues, which we do sort of one at a time, sometimes a little bit like peeling an onion, but one at a time. So, and the SPS issues, I should say, have been a major focus of our, as you know well, of our discussions with China. We have gone through a whole lot of their various, I don't want to say schemes, but processes that keep U.S. agricultural product and other agricultural products out.
I appreciate your answer. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, first of all, thank you for holding this hearing. I certainly share many of the views that you have articulated today. And colleagues, I'm just going to start off by saying that what we're going to be talking about this morning is one of the least known and biggest issues facing our country as it relates to creating more good-paying jobs and expanding markets for our country around the world. And as the chairman indicated, I am very much interested in addressing the proposition that it is long past time to fix what's wrong with the World Trade Organization. In my view, that process has got to begin with China. China became a member of the World Trade Organization in December 2001. Based on nearly 2 decades of hard evidence, it's clear that the agreements that allowed China to join the World Trade Organization have fallen far short. The rules that underpin the WTO were crafted more than 2 decades ago when China was essentially an economic middleweight. At that time, multiple states within our country actually had economies that were larger than China's. During the debate on China entering the World Trade Organization, many predicted that membership would drive China away from one-party control of government and economics. And the Chinese made specific commitments dealing with economic reforms as a precondition of joining the WTO. That was the basis on which the Congress granted China normalized trade relations with the United States, legislation which I supported. Today, China is no longer a middleweight. China is an economic heavyweight, second only to the United States, and continues to grow rapidly. Much of that growth has come at our direct expense and in violation of World Trade Organization rules and World Trade Organization commitments that were made in 2001. What I'm talking about are the following: subsidized state-owned enterprises, intellectual property theft, forced tech transfers, the great internet firewall government-led shakedowns of foreign investors. China has used those schemes to strong-arm American businesses, steal American innovations, and rip off American jobs. Especially under President Xi, the government has tightened its grip on power. For our purposes in today's hearing, the Chinese government identifies weaknesses in the WTO system, and then it seizes on them to further their country's explosive growth. The U.S. and our economic allies have not done enough to crack down on those abuses. WTO rules, as I've indicated, date back to a time before the internet was in effect this country's shipping lane and the center of gravity for international commerce. It was a time when smartphones were still science fiction. It shouldn't be any surprise that those rules can't keep up with China's modern-day trade ripoffs. As the chairman and I have both indicated, there's bipartisan interest in addressing that problem, and today gives us a chance to accelerate the effort to find real solutions. I'm hopeful that the talks currently happening with respect to digital trade rules will finally drag the WTO into this century. And I'm quite certain that Ambassador Lighthizer shares that perspective. One topic is particularly important to the Pacific Northwest. It's under active discussion at the WTO, and this is the matter of unfair fishing subsidies. Senator Crapo, a senior member of this committee, and I held a trade subcommittee hearing on this issue dating back to 2010. The bottom line is that an agreement that curbs fishing subsidies is going to protect jobs in our fisheries, promote sustainable oceans, and obviously accomplishing both of those objectives is also a bipartisan goal. Finally, it's quite clear that our workers, and this is true from sea to shining sea. I see it in Oregon. I see it when I go elsewhere. Our workers have had enough with respect to cheating by China and other countries. And when the WTO proves too slow to stop the cheats, or when it announces decisions that clash with the founding principles, I think it's pretty obvious that lawmakers no longer are just going to grin and bear it. It's important for our country to fight for the economic system that was created after World War II. And it was built on strong democratic alliances. It faced down the Soviet Union and helped to reduce violent conflict around the world. Unfortunately, I think this administration too often signals to our allies that they aren't interested in defending that system from attackers and cheats. So updating the WTO is an issue where we can't have a bunch of tough talk and then take a pass on real action. An effective, fair, and enforceable trade system is the best defense our country can have against underhanded economic tactics by China. Mr. Chairman, I look forward to working with you and our colleagues.